So what we're going to do next here is we're going to go through the basis of our Miracle Canine Training Guide 2021.
Okay.
But I don't think we're going to go through the whole thing. I think we're going to go through the basis of it, and then we'll go over the rest of it next time.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so in effort to constantly grow and evolve the way that we do different things, I'm constantly making tweaks and adjustments to the training program that we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly experimenting myself. I'm constantly finding, as I'm working with more and more dogs, different ways to handle different things, different ways to make things more efficient. And as we get more trainers here, I'm trying to create some clear guidelines that can be followed to help reach the same end goal still. We were talking about, right? The North Star, right? These are some general things in order for how to do that. So one thing some of the staff has been bugging me for a while now is to put together like a really concrete guide as far as this is, in a perfect world, a very general, if you follow this order of operations, you'll be able to have a trained dog fairly effectively.
Yeah.
Right? So this is broken into 3 phases here. We're going to outline some of this here, right? Phase 1 is our leash pressure stage with things, right? So all good training starts with a good foundation, right? And in order to teach any sort of behaviors with your dog, you have to make sure that you have some sort of means of being able to get the dog to physically do these different things. Now, some may ask, why do you use leash pressure for this as opposed to food for this? Well, actually, we use a combination of the two, but I prefer the leash pressure because that's something I know will be universal to all dogs, regardless of if they have food drive or not, that I'll be able to shape and develop some of the muscle memory of the commands we're about to teach, right? So literally phase 1, leash pressure. The goal of this phase is to establish muscle memory of all of the positions and commands we will be using with the dog. The goal is not perfection, just that we could relatively easily get the dog into these positions with minimal resistance. We typically use a leash and prong collar and food if the dog is motivated for it in this phase, right? So again, why do we do this step? We do this step to build muscle memory of the positions. Can you do that with food if you have a very motivated dog? Absolutely, right? I used to talk about in a perfect world, if I had a dog that was extremely food motivated, there would be a phase before this where I would shape everything with just food first, then I would layer the leash pressure in with the food. So I'd make sure the dog can follow that treat into a sit, follow that treat into a down, follow that treat onto a bed. But if you combine the two in this phase and you make sure the dog understands clearly using the leash, pressure up means get into a sit, and there's a reward for it.
Yeah.
Pressure down on the leash means get into the down, and there's a reward for it. Pressure onto the bed means get onto the bed, and there's a reward for it, et cetera, et cetera. You can kind of balance out the best of both worlds, and you could sidestep a lot of issues you may have with just trying to do it with the food.
Yeah.
Right? So that's phase 1 of our training process. We would do that with all of our different commands. Phase 2 of our training process would be to teach all commands individually, right? With the e-collar here. So this is our e-collar stage. Now, why do we use e-collars? Again, we use e-collars because e-collars are a tool that allows you to be able to communicate very effectively and consistently as you transition from person to person, right? So as we talked about with this trainer, building this relationship with this dog just on playing and this and that cannot be transferred very easily to somebody else because it's too long of a process, right? The e-collar allows for any communicating that I'm doing with giving corrections for unwanted behaviors, teaching the dog to come to us when called, et cetera, et cetera. It makes sure that it's consistent across the board as far as how the dog is perceiving it, right? So a level 10 on an e-collar is going to feel the same to a dog regardless of how you're doing it, how I'm doing it, how Joe Schmo over here is doing it, et cetera, et cetera. It also allows you to increase or decrease the amount of motivation very easily. With just a leash, if you're giving corrections with it, you have to be so dynamic with that tool. You have to be able to be really, really soft sometimes, really, really firm sometimes, somewhere in the middle sometimes, right? And that can be very, very tricky for some people to do, right? So we use an e-collar for these reasons. So phase 2, the goal of the phase is to ensure that all commands are taught and understood completely and independently from each other on leash. Outlined is the process for each of those commands. We only work on one command per session in this phase. We use food rewards if the dog is motivated in this step. We'll spend most of your training time with your dogs in this phase. So basically what we're doing is we're going in and we're taking the muscle memory we built with the leash, we're adding our verbal commands to these positions, and we're making sure the dog understands the e-collar pressure, getting into these positions with those commands, right? So we would be following a process using negative reinforcement initially. So continuous pressure, teaching the dog where the pressure comes off. From there, we would transition into allowing the dog to respond just to the verbal command initially. Then if they don't do it, responding to an e-collar correction afterwards. We begin adding duration in so they understand how to stay in those positions. And we'd spend time just taking the dog out for 15 minutes, working on a bunch of downs. Taking the dog out for 15 minutes, working just our healing, et cetera, until we have the dog clearly understanding all of these different positions as the commands, right? So they don't understand just the muscle memory. They understand the cue associated with those positions. And again, there's a step-by-step way of doing this with all of our individual commands we'll be teaching. Again, still using food for the process, because if the dog has the capabilities for it, we like to keep the motivation as high as we can, right? Yeah. We try to be fair with it. We try to be balanced with it. But in the end of the day, the e-collar is what's really going to help these owners when they go home, which is why, again, it's very centered around that. Phase 3 is combining commands and generalizing, right? So once we have all of our commands taught, we would move into a similar phase where we would take those commands and we would start proofing them. So that would mean working them in different types of environments, working them in different sequences so that the dog is being challenged. So the goal of this phase is to take all the commands we've taught and begin to show the dog different pictures and versions of the commands to proof their understanding of them. In addition to that, we will be increasing the difficulty of the commands to make sure they go from fun tricks to real-world reliable commands. These are some general ideas of how you can go about doing this. These are not concrete things that have to be followed in any particular order, just ideas on how to structure out your training sessions and showing you how to take things to the next level. Remember, focus on what the dog needs and what the owner hired us for. Don't waste your time doing flashy drills inside of the training center if the biggest issue is public access or socialization. Now, this is a big thing that I can't say enough for some trainers out there. Your owners hired you for a specific thing. So once you have everything taught, focus on those things, right? If a dog is there for dog aggression issues, a majority of your training is going to be socialization once you're out of the teaching stage. Yeah. If the owner hired you because they want to be able to take the dog on patios and have the dog be calm, a majority of your sessions are going to be going to public places and working very long, hour-long downstays under tables and things like that. If the owner wants to be able to do off-leash hikes with the dog, you're going to want to go to a lot of places and work that come command a lot in those situations, et cetera, et cetera. Focus on those things. Now, this is the stage where, with the trainers that we have at our facility, where I encourage them a lot more to start adding their flair to things, right? Yeah. Because the initial teaching of things, that's where the scientific way that you're doing things and making sure you're being accurate and having good timing and all that kind of stuff is really important, because you're trying to teach. You're trying to connect a cue to a behavior and have the dog understand all of the baseline communication that we need in order to keep them successful. From there, you could have fun with the dog. Right? From there, you could add in your obedience command into play sessions where you teach the dog to work for a toy and incorporate the obedience commands and stuff into that process, right? Where you could mix up, again, all of the different types of things that the owner may need, and you could add your kind of spin to things, right? Yeah. But keep in mind, we don't do that until we've taught everything, right? We have to build muscle memory. We have to teach. Then we have fun with the dog. Yeah. Right? And different types of ways we would do that is we do generalizing command sessions. We do combining command sessions, because obviously once we've taught each individual command, when we go through a process of linking commands together, like doing comes out of downstays, or different drills where we do off-leash healing, then go do doorways, then do a down at a doorway, then go outside and put the dog on a bed and do all these different things. There are other things to keep in mind as you're linking those things together. Those are all different pictures that the dog doesn't know yet. And just because they may understand come and down and bed and all of these types of things, if you go to link all three of them together, it's a new picture. So you want to make sure you're doing that very effectively. You want to do Freestyle sessions. Those are the ones where you could really put your spin on it. You could mix it up. Mix it. Scratch the deck.
God.
Oh, man. Where you would really try to paint a picture. Typically what I'll do for a freestyle session is I'll paint a picture in my head of like, okay, cool, I'm going to this place and I need to go through the doorway and come in and put the dog in a down state while I go check in and then walk the dog patiently through these 3 doorways to go in here. Then we would release the dog and we would do some social with the dog. Then I would have to call the dog out of that social to me and leave that place and go back outside, right? Like I paint my picture in a head of like, what's a real life thing I would need to do, right? And what I'll do is I'll try to recreate that, right? I'll try to show that picture to the dog, right? Another example. Oh, it's house cleaning day, right? Oh, wow. So I need to put the dog on a bed and then I need to go vacuum around them and get the broom out and mop a little bit, maybe go into the other room to grab some cleaner spray and come back in and do all this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like I'll paint these different pictures of what are real life things we might need to do with the dog and I'll show them those pictures. That's kind of what a freestyle session to me would be, right? And then the final topics to know section, we break down markers. This is the markers that we use throughout our training program. Remember, markers are not commands. They don't mean to do something. They just identify things to the dog, right? It tells the dog clearly what's getting rewarded, what's getting corrected when they're finished with the things that they're doing. And then we get into learning theory. We've talked about learning theory on here. It's the understanding of all of the ways that dogs, humans, animals learn. Broken down into the positive and negative, the reinforcement and the punishment, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Understanding all of those topics and making sure that you then... Let's see what I wrote here for it. Learning theory is the breakdown of all the techniques we use to teach behavior and how they're identified. It is extremely important to understand as it will allow you to look at anything you're doing and ensure it is scientifically accurate, right? And this is where you get into people that started in the sport dog world understand this stuff very, very well. Because when you're teaching precise behaviors, when you're teaching very complex tasks to dogs, if you're not being scientifically correct with it, the dog won't get it.
That's true.
Right? It won't work.
It will not.
So the reason why I stress that this is so important is because it'll allow you to look at whatever you're doing, regardless of what it is. If you're working with a leash, if you're working with food, if you're working with an e-collar, if you're working with literally any tool that you might use with the dog, you could ask yourself, which of these categories does it fit into? And am I using it correctly? Am I adding the thing at the correct time? Am I taking away the thing at the correct time? Am I using the right type of reinforcement? Am I using the right type of punishment? Right? And it allows you to look at, wow, I'm having this issue. I need to use, what do I want to do? I want to stop a behavior, right? Which means that we would need to use a punishment because that would decrease the likelihood of a behavior, right? And do I want to add something to stop that behavior? Or do I want to subtract something? Or is there something I even could subtract, right? Probably not, right? So to give you an example of that, right? Let's take a counter surfing, for example, right? The dog jumps on the counter. They get a cookie. The dog jumps on the counter. They get steal a cookie, right? The dog jumps on the counter and they steal a cookie.
Stealing a cookie.
Dog jumps on a counter. They steal a cookie, right? So every time, if I wanted to use positive punishment for that, I would be adding something to the equation to decrease the likelihood of a behavior, right? All I would do is I would add a correction. Dog jumps on the counter. No, bam. Dog jumps on the counter. No, bam, right? Punishment, right? Decreases the likelihood of the behavior. Something they don't like happens when they do that. That's the most effective way to do it. Negative punishment we hardly ever use, right? This is something that positive-only trainers will preach. We only use positive reinforcement and negative punishment, which is the removal of something from the equation to decrease the likelihood of a behavior, right? So dog jumps on the counter, right? And they go to steal the cookie, and I take the cookie away. They don't get it, right? Dog goes to do it. I take the cookie away. Right? I'm removing the reinforcement of jumping on the counter to try to decrease the likelihood of them doing it. Again, you get into it's a long process.
Yeah.
Right? You have to repeatedly do that. You have to be consistent about it because if they get one time when they jump up there,
It's all for nothing.
oh, it worked this time, right? Because it doesn't, that's it. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the idea of negative punishment. And that's why we don't really use it a whole lot. It's kind of unrealistic, you know?
Yeah.
But it's effective in certain situations, right? We use another example of negative punishment, right? I'm petting my dog. And this is one that you could apply. We recommend people do with like puppies and stuff, right?
Okay.
Petting your dog. Suddenly the dog jumps on you. Zoop.
Done.
Petting goes away completely, right?
Okay.
So dog jumped on you. I removed something from the equation to decrease the likelihood of that jumping. The reinforcement is gone.
Yep.
Dog gets off of you, I start petting them again. So then I did positive reinforcement. Right? I added something for not jumping, increase the likelihood of that behavior.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And it gets complicated. We've done topics on learning theory, obviously. Yeah. So this is the general gist of this. This is how we kind of broke it down so everybody can understand it. It's pretty long. I think it's like 6,000 words or something like that. So we don't really have a ton of time to go over it right now because we just ranted for a long time.